We are probably familiar with Jung's concept of the shadow. Modern spiritualists and New Age communities can appropriate this Jungian psychological praxis. They communicate our shadow traits as things that are bad, something we must overcome in a Maslowian quest for becoming so-called enlightened humans. This is a form of spiritual and, I think, human bypassing. The shadow must be genuinely integrated, not shamed, but accepted, welcomed, and embraced. So, what comes next is the most radical leap of faith. Our philosophies and our theories questioning the very labels we hold for granted and turning those assumptions on their head. Jung's way of doing this is to reconcile the opposites, as he did in his descent into the imaginal realm in the Red Book. When we label something as evil, an other becomes posited, harboring a spectral shadow of the psyche. But that other may not really be evil, and the person labeling them may not be the epitome of goodness either. So we have to ask, who is doing the assigning of whether these others are good or evil, this or that? What is their relationship with culture, context, and power? Who is the subject they reference, and what do they have at stake? Are they fighting oppression or perpetuating it? Reconciling the opposites does not just involve the begging of some innocent child to be loved, or even some undesirable thingness to be extracted, manipulated, and transformed from ourselves into some everlasting goodness like capital L light, or something that makes us magically graduate into stable and egoless adults after undergoing a dark night of the soul and doing shadow work. Talk of integrating the shadow can manifest in spiritual speak as the inner child, a pejorative term in certain contexts that miscategorizes something very real and adult, like the raw, authentic response of anger against an oppressor or the fear of being annihilated. These are not childish feelings or impulses. They are human, and they are for our survival. But this characterization is a powerful, pejorative weapon of the intellect in psychology, stemming from a byproduct of its own inability to reckon with its true shadow, the other it never really wanted to reconcile. And so it did through navigating the confluences of cultural biases and oppressions against itself. All this done under guises wielding the power of pathology and polarization to create psychological and intellectual distancing and shaming. So, what a breath of fresh air to hear a radical acceptance of evil, which Jung proposes conversing with these archetypal figures in the Red Book. His very notions of this being good and this being bad become so scrambled, he emerges questioning the very scaffoldings of morality and reality itself. And yet, we need not, indeed, we can't abandon morality to do this. When so much is at stake, when evil does exist, at least on a human moral plane. So this makes me wonder, how do we truly reconcile the opposites? Don't opposites exist in a world where the earth burns and greedy tyrants turn their heads from the atrocities they commit? But they are not so simple. Gender or biological sex do not exist on a binary spectrum. So why should we consider good and evil as such? The task of reconciling the opposites then becomes to question the labels of evil with more nuance, awareness, and discernment than we typically do. We can learn from facing our fears and by watching how projected and stigmatized others form in defensive mechanisms in response from a hyper-rational, weaponized intellect which wields its psychology against the so-called other for implicit or explicit abusive purposes, and perpetuates levels of oppression against them in rationalist guise. Reconciling the opposites, like the shadow within ourselves, must involve truly embracing all that which is other and not just excusing or pejoratively labeling or shaming, let alone denying those essential, human, raw, and real components of ourselves, so denied by culture and so feared. So, reconciling the opposite needs further academic and moral investigation, interrogation, and integration. It starts with peeling back the layers of oppressive, colonizing mechanisms of control from the psyche and intellect. We must scrutinize how our categorizations are utilized and how they police, shame, censor, and conjure the other to reconcile the opposites.